Hello and welcome to the Love, Listen, Talk, Repeat podcast. I'm Wendy Capewell, your podcast host, as well as being a counsellor and psychotherapist, author, and speaker. In each of these podcast episodes, I'll be joined by various guests, sharing their expertise and experiences on different subjects. So, let's get on with this week's show.
So today's guest is Jo Huey, and she is a speaker and trainer working with families of alcoholics and specifically with daughters. So I'm going to hand you over because Jo, you've got a real story to tell. So tell the audience more about what you do and how you came to do it.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here, and I love talking about this topic. So, so my name's Jo Huey, and I am the daughter of an alcoholic. I am also the sister to one alcoholic, and I have grown up in a home of alcohol misuse. My father was the drinker in my life, so pretty much from a young age, I would recall him being a drinker, and he did a lot of his drinking in secret. I knew he was drinking as I got older, and it was something that I guess anyone that's been in this situation, we don't know any different, and we kind of adjust to living with somebody that drinks all the time. I live with my mum and my older sister, and my dad did work. He had a full-time job as a welder. He used to be in the army. His natural kind of personality was one of very kind, very warm-hearted, do anything for anyone, very hands-on person, DIY, held down a very good job for the Ministry of Defence, but had some issues, and I have got no idea why he started his drinking. My mum doesn't really know why, and so I don't know why that happened. But I think the hardest thing for me was that I had this innate need, to be loved by him, to know that this person, that's someone that's meant to love and care for me, I just desperately wanted that, but unfortunately it wasn't something he was able to give me, and he isolated himself quite a lot, which is pretty common for people that drink. They tend to isolate themselves because they've got quite a lot of shame and guilt, and they like to keep everything secret because they don't want to be pulled up on what they don't want to be down. They know it's wrong or unhelpful to them and the family, and so I didn't really see a great deal of him when he's, wasn't at work. He was sort of in his car. He'd sit and listen to music all the time. And so I didn't really, he wasn't really part of the family life a lot of the time. Most of what I remember is, me, my mum and my sister spending quite a lot of time together, and going to the beach, going to the park, all that. And my dad was never really there. He never sat and had dinner with us and things like that. So when he did do those things, sit in the lounge to watch the telly, it felt really uncomfortable. And we all, including my mum, were scared of him. Alcohol made him quite aggressive, and he did physically abuse us. And my sister and I would say, actually, we prefer to have the slap round the head, the slap round the legs, the slap, rather than the mental, emotional torture. Many times I'd been made to sit and eat, or something, can be sat there for an hour or more, and I wouldn't be able to get down from the table. And I remember it's ridiculous now as I think about it, but I remember us saying to him specifically, if you're going to hit us, can you just not hit us around the head? So we were trying to choose where we were being hit, because it hurt. And so we were sort of trying to flee to his better nature. It was ridiculous, as I think about it now. And so a lot of growing up life, anyone that's in this situation will know that you're walking on eggshells a lot of the time. You don't really know what they're going to do, what they're going to say. You find yourself sometimes, a lot of the time, waiting for their reaction, waiting for them to say something, waiting for them to know what they're going to do. I mean, I remember positioning myself in my kitchen so that if he was angry, because I didn't know what mood he'd be in, I had a plan. So you get very strategic and you're very good at thinking off the cuff real quick, you know. And as adults, we still do that if we haven't kind of, you know, learned otherwise. But come in the back door and I'd be waiting and seeing what mood he's in. And if he got really angry, I could run round the dinner table one way, the opposite way to him, to keep myself safe. And by the door which led to the hallway, so I could always run back behind me, away from him. But you know, all this type of thinking, that's just one example, but that's the type of stuff you do in that environment. So to keep,
you become hyper vigilant. Yeah, you become hyper vigilant. You're constantly alert, and that follows you into adulthood, because that's how, you know, your survival system never gets to rest. It's always up and ready to go. So that means that it's kind of emotional flooding, because your body's constantly flooded with that adrenaline and cortisol, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And it's not easy to relax, because you know, sometimes it's physically not safe to do so. So you need to be on alert all the time. And me and my sister talk now, you know, and we sort of say, when we go into a room or a place, we can scan that room within an inch of its life, you know, knowing who's there, where the exits are, what's going on, who's looking at who. And it's exhausting.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
yeah, because all those senses are heightened, aren't they?
Yeah, 100%. And that makes it very difficult to, you know, to relax. And I think that a lot of the, you know, the rest of sort of growing up with my dad, because he kicked me out at the age of 16, was very much the same. Obviously, there's lots of complexities when you live in that sort of environment. You don't have much self-esteem. There's lots of shame. You know, you lose your confidence. My dad was very critical, so you know, I developed perfectionism, and you know, many of us are people pleasers because we're forever putting the needs of the drinker above anybody else. And my mum wasn't a very sort of strong person to stand up to him, so you know, I had separate issues with my mum, who was the sober parent, because I felt that she didn't protect me and didn't do the things that I felt she should have done. You know, as a obviously on reflection as an adult, I'm looking back thinking, well, I feel my mum should have done this, that and the other. And it's not till now that I've reflected and recognised she had her own issues and just didn't have those skills to be able to do that. But unfortunately, the knock-on effect to us living in that environment is huge, you know, and growing up as children and then going into adult life, all of these issues you take with you unless you know, have therapy and work on them and so on. But my dad then sort of had a couple of, well, he was in and out of like mental health institutions and got really unwell, physically unwell. And he'd already lost, my mum and him had a child. They'd had a, you know, the child died. And then when I was about, I don't know, something around the time of my 16th or something along those lines, my dad's first son was killed on the railway, and so he lost another son. So it set his drinking off again, worse. And then by the time I was 2 months before my 21st birthday, 2 policemen came into my work to tell me that he'd passed away from his alcohol misuse. And that came as a total shock. I thought they were going to tell me that he'd had a car accident or something, but or done something, drunk driving, whatever, I don't know. I wasn't expecting that anyway. And then really that was the beginning of my sort of self-development journey after the funeral, and kind of recognizing that I'd had some issues with my friendships and relationships, which again is really common for daughters and sons of alcoholics, and started, you know, my therapy journey really. And that's kind of and then years later, I started a business after someone said to me, "Jo, you've got a story to tell, you should tell it." And that was sort of 4.5 years ago now, and I've just sort of been focusing on helping people like me. I've done 24 years of self-development, so I'm using all my experience, and I've qualified in a few different things to help people so that they're not going through the pain unnecessarily, that there is a way out, that there is hope, that people can get well and, get recover and heal, because that's what we're looking for. We're looking for peace, we're looking for healing. So that's a bit
definitely. That's a bit of No, I thank you for sharing that story, because it's been obviously an awful lot happened in your life. And, as I said, you were obviously growing up, you learnt how to deal with it, but it has left that legacy of being hypervigilant, which is, it's a difficult one, because one, it's affecting us emotionally, but also it can affect us physically as well. I don't think people understand the degree that, those stress hormones, we need them, but not constant. It's like having an electrical appliance plugged in 24/7. You need, the plug gets hot after a while, and that's what happens to us, isn't it? We're just overloaded, and the slightest thing can then trigger the emotions, whether it's fear, anger, sadness, I don't know, fright, anything. All those emotions will come up, and then it affects adult relationships.
Yeah, sure.
Because it's a trigger, and off it goes. And I think my thought is that if somebody has a relationship with alcohol, they can't have a relationship with anyone else, because that alcohol comes first.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's why you said your dad wasn't available, because his relationship was with alcohol.
Yeah. And sadly, a lot of members will often say, they're choosing the alcohol over me. Why aren't I enough? And kind of make it about them. And unfortunately, it isn't about us, and it isn't a choice either. But families get very caught up in that, and they can't let that go, and they think that the person's drinking, especially as children, because children are narcissistic in a horrible way, but everything revolves around us. So as children living in that environment, when things go wrong, if mum and dad are arguing, if dad's shouting us, if we're doing, we blame ourselves. So then we carry all this blame, and then, in turn, we think we're not good enough. We think we're unworthy, bad people. And then that carries on through our life and affects us and our self-esteem and how we act and interact in our relationships with whoever it is, with whether it's our work colleagues or whoever.
Yeah.
And you mentioned about triggers a minute ago, and I wanted to just quickly share something that an addiction specialist called Gabor Mate shares, and he talks about triggers, and he says that when somebody triggers us, so this trigger word is being used quite a lot now, so this is when somebody does something that pushes our buttons. He said they are these people, we should be thanking them, because they're showing us something that is still not in us. They are the trigger, but we are the ammunition. So within us is the ammunition, and this isn't going to, these people are just showing us what we haven't yet healed. And so he's saying, we should say thank you to them, because actually it's saying, okay, I haven't really dealt with this yet. And because these people are not the problem, it's with us. So I thought that was quite interesting. And another lady had shared something quite in similar sort of lines, but I thought that was quite a good way of describing it.
Yes, I quite like that, because it as you say, it brings it to our attention. It's not about what they've done or what they've said. It's about, as you say, something within us when we get triggered. And it is being able to stop at that point and say, what is going on for me at this point? And I don't think... Say again?
Have I experienced this feeling before?
Yes. Yeah. And that takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of thinking about, and yeah, you really need to spend that time to be able to do that, and yeah, have some kind of knowledge of ourselves and the ability to do that. And I don't think people do. They just generally they react, and they don't ever stop and think, what is that about? Why do I feel that way? What's happened? You know, and I think that's it. Well, it must be them. I'm in the wrong relationship, or they've set me off, or you said that, you've done that, you've made me. Instead of taking responsibility.
Yeah. And also what that does is because we actually are then not able to fix, because a lot of our, you know, daughters of alcoholics, sons of alcoholics, you know, we can't be okay. This is the codependency, you know, we can't be okay unless they're okay. And so, you know, we need to separate ourselves so that we know that we have the power to make ourselves feel better, irrelevant of what they're doing. But all of this stuff, you know, it is, you know, like you say, it takes time. It's self-awareness, you know, and unless you get to the point where you start recognizing some things and you kind of think, actually, I'm fed up of behaving like this, or I'm fed up of feeling like this. And then you start thinking, well, let me get a book, or let me find out a bit about why am I doing it? And, you know, then you get, but that's no different to the drinker, you know, they've got to be ready. And so have we. And I think with families often, you know, we're pointing the finger at the drinkers, and, you know, we perceive them, they're the ones causing all these issues. And I'm not saying that there are not consequences from their behavior, but ultimately we're all trying to cope, and they are trying to deal with emotional pain, and most of them have experienced trauma, yet we've got our own. And it's like we're pointing the finger at them and saying, well, you know, stop doing this, stop doing that. But then we keep doing the behaviours we keep doing, which is perpetuating the relationship and what's going on as well. So we play a part as well, but we aren't taking responsibility for that part. We're just putting it onto them, saying, well, you're the one that's, you know, got the problem. You're the one that's the drinker. Well, that type of talk just makes them retreat and feels worse than they already do.
Yeah. And as you say, that alcohol is a way of them self-soothing in the wrong way, in a most unhealthy way, but for them, it numbs them, it gives them confidence, it relaxes them, it takes away the real pain of why they're drinking. What is it? What you want to escape from? What is those, I don't know, I think in some cases it's you know, that they're reliving that trauma in some way or another, whether they're getting panic attacks or nightmares or whatever else. Something is triggering them, their trauma, and so that's it. I'm going to use alcohol to block it out.
Yeah.
And the first step is for them to acknowledge that, and that's hard because so many people who are alcohol dependent or turning to alcohol for support won't admit it.
Yeah,
I'm not an alcoholic.
Yeah. I think that it does, you know, take time, but, you know, as family members help the process, but it's very difficult to do that when you're a child. You know, there is certain things that we can do depending on how old we are, you know, so it's not till now that I've got a lot more empathy and compassion, but as a child, obviously, you know, this is the difficult thing. And again, Gabor Mate talks about this, and you know, attachment. We need attachment when we're children, and we need authenticity. And if we don't have those things, if we don't attach to our parents, however unhealthy they are, we won't survive. And so we have to kind of adjust ourselves to be able to live in that environment. So even though it could be worst environment, we still have to try and attach to these people in order to survive. And
Yeah.
it's about brain development and things like that, and saying that if, you know, things haven't properly, if our brain hasn't developed properly, then, and he says up to the age of 3, and anything after that, you're going to basically be paying for it for the pretty much the rest of your life unless you seek therapy. And so we're not getting the some of us, you know, are going to be adjusting ourselves to attach to these parents that aren't really giving us what we need, but we just do it, like I say, to survive. And our parents were, if we're living with a drinker and they had those issues, you know, at birth, then their problems and then passed on to us, and it's like, and that's continues on until someone breaks that process. But we need to try and support the drinkers as best we can. But like I said, it isn't easy because we've got our own stuff going on, like codependency. So it is a very complex thing to resolve, but it is possible to heal and to, you know, to support the drinker and get on with our lives as well as adults. Obviously, as children, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think yes, as you say, you've got to have that ability, and children don't, and as you say, they'll do whatever it is to help them survive. And I think what is so sad is that often in those situations the roles get reversed. The child ends up parenting their parent, and the parent doesn't take any responsibility. So that means that child then takes on the role that they're not built for. They're not, you know, is wrong. And that creates so many problems as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I 100% relate to that. You know, growing up, and I am definitely the overachiever, overly responsible, and that is because I interpreted the situation I was in the way in which I did, which meant that I felt I had to be responsible for everything. My sister interpreted that same environment in a completely different way. We talked about ourselves, actually. I created this quiz called Rule Abider and Rule Breaker, because it does define our kind of characteristics, and it's not to label us or anything. It was just a handy way to kind of say, actually, yeah, you're more like this and I'm more like that. And she's definitely the rule breaker and I'm the rule abider. So yeah, I think the overly responsibility definitely fits in that category. And that is true for so many of the different characteristics that we will develop. Anxiety, depression, you know, PTSD, it's all coming from our childhood. It's all coming in and impacting in our present, in our adult life. People pleasing, we will then attract people into our lives where we struggle to say no to them, and we're always doing stuff for them and not putting ourselves first. So many things. We're fearful of authority figures. There's just loads of types of characteristics that we will and the anxiety is definitely a huge one for us, because we've lived in an environment which is where you're walking on eggshells all the time. You know, you're anticipating, you're worrying, you're thinking, well, if I do this, will that happen? And you're thinking 3 miles down the road. Well, that makes you feel really anxious because there's so much uncertainty. And then all of those behaviours will carry on into adult life.
Yeah, yes, exactly. I don't think people recognise quite how deeply it can affect us. And you can still function in the world. It doesn't mean you can't hold in a job, you can't have friends, you can't do things, because you function, but it's just what's going on inside you, isn't it? Inside us. And I think another thing came into my head was about loyalty. Because I think although we know our parents aren't doing the right thing, there is that loyalty. I can't tell anyone. And yeah, I remember a client telling me that she lied to her teachers because her parent, you know, wasn't available. And that's a really hard one, because they, in their heads, they think, if I tell them what's happened, this will mean I'll be taken away, or my parents will be taken away. I could be put in care. They could go to prison. And then what that, you know, they're thinking in their, like an adult, and the repercussions are so great. So it's a misguided loyalty, but it's a protection, because they're thinking about, you know, how I've got to make sure my family stays together or they don't get into trouble.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the pieces of work that, you know, I'm trying to do with regards to encouraging family members to speak up and to start to reduce the stigma around alcohol misuse, just like we've done with mental health, so that we can make it okay to talk about this stuff. And you're right, we were in a position where social workers were involved and things like that, and we didn't tell them anything either, because we were too scared to, you know, the repercussions. And like you say, we were thinking way beyond our years, you know, we were responsible way beyond our years. You know, fun was not something that came, you know, freely. And so we took, you know, we were thinking all of these sorts of things that we shouldn't have had to have. It wasn't our job to worry about that sort of thing. But we did, because, you know, one of the internal laws is don't talk. So you don't talk to anyone outside of the family, really. Most people wouldn't, because of the shame as well. There's lots as well.
Oh, shame and touch. Yeah. There is. I think it is, the more we talk about it, as you say, and I think the one thing that is we've talked about on another occasion is the fact that during this pandemic and people having to stay at home, and there's been an increase in drinking. I think people are, you know, that turning to alcohol simply because it is a way of escapism. And then everywhere we look, you know, whether it, you need to go out for a drink on a Saturday night, you know, alcohol is always involved in socializing. It's, if you don't drink, it's, well, what's wrong with you? Even to the point that people will spike soft drinks, you know, and they think it's funny. There seems to be something really unpleasant about this whole alcohol thing that people aren't noticing.
No, I know. And I think that this is a huge discussion and something I get on my soapbox about. That's why I started my Respect for Alcohol campaign, because, you know, this is one of the worst drugs out there. It's the only drug, and it's the only drug that affects every single part of the body. And the government, you know, it's socially acceptable. It's, you know, it's very available. It's very reasonably priced, and the government make lots of money from it. On the flip side, it destroys and kills lives, and it costs the NHS, you know, the police with things like crime, and it costs in people's lives, as in their mental health and well-being. And you can't put a figure on that. And actually, I think costs are way greater than the money that they bring in, because you know, we need to not. My campaign is about respecting alcohol. It's not about saying that people shouldn't drink and that, you know, it's bad, although it is a drug and it is a poison. It's just about saying, just respect a drug that is really dangerous, just like you would heroin and cocaine. That's the sort of premise of it, really. It's just like, let's just be mindful about how we talk about it, how we put pressure on people that don't drink, how we joke about it. You know, how many greetings cards are there with alcohol on, and children and alcohol? You know, it's just everywhere. Jokes on Facebook, it's all alcohol related. And it just trivializes it. And again, I'm obviously going to be passionate about it because of my history, but this is something that creates so many issues for society. And then we've all got something to say about the lack of resources for the NHS or the lack of resources for policing and stuff, but yet we're the ones that cause the problems when we drink too much. So we're part of the issue. So it's just about having a respect for something that causes a lot of damage, really.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I'm not against, you know, alcohol drinking, but it is treating it with respect, and as you say, and being sensible. And and acknowledging the damage it can do. So I think this is a really big subject that you've brought up, and I'm glad we've had this conversation. So thank you, Jo. What is one thing you would say to people? I think we said a lot, but the one thing you would remind people of, or get them to think about, take away with them.
Specific, I guess this is aimed specifically at families. Well, it's relevant to anybody, but obviously in the context of this. So it's the focus and the answers start with you. You've got all the answers yourself, and we need to focus on ourselves. And when I say that, I mean that we need to get curious, not critical. So we need to come at it from a place of, oh, I wonder why I did that, or I wonder why I feel like that, rather than, oh, why did I do that? That's a very critical way. So it starts with us. Get curious about things. Start asking yourself questions. Where's that come from? How do I feel about that? And wait for the answers, because they will come, because it's all within you. That's what therapeutic sort of sessions are all about. We facilitate, the answers which you already have. So that is, and that's the biggest lesson I've learned over 24 years of self-development, and it still continues, and it still reinforces that message that it needs to come from us. It needs to start with us.
Yeah, and that's really, I like that so much, because I get clients saying to me, well, what do you think? And I said, well, hang on a minute, you know the answer. This isn't about what I think, this is about you. And sometimes they say, I don't know. And I'm, okay, what might you think if you did know? Yeah. Because that really, you're going a level down and saying, hang on a minute, I'm not going to accept, in some ways you're saying, I'm not going to accept that.
No.
I don't know. That's kind of not going there. Yeah. Okay, what do you think it might be if you did know?
Yeah, I usually say.
Then they might say,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so I think we both given a couple of tips there, but thank you, Jo. So an easy way that people can get in touch with you, because all your details will be in the show notes, but one easy way that people can get in touch with you.
Probably the easiest way is, because my name's pretty unusual, you can just Google me. Quite a lot comes up. So it's Jo, J-O, and then Huey, H-U-E-Y. And all my details will come up on my website, articles, all sorts of things. So that's probably the easiest way. Just Google me.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jo. I've really enjoyed today. Thank you
for having me. It's been brilliant. Thank you so much.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I'd love to hear from you and what you think. So do get in touch. If you'd like to learn more about me, how I help people who are struggling with issues relating to their personal life or relationships, as well as finding out how you can work with me, go to my website, www.wendycapewell.co.uk, where you can find my contact details and book a free call with me. You really don't have to struggle alone. Until next time, take care. Bye.